I woke up, startled to a loud pounding on my window. Puzzled, I turned over and went back to sleep, but the banging didn't stop. Rain hit the roof like daggers, wind whistled through cracks in the walls as the nearby crashed against the rocky coast, and now it's incessant banging at the window. Annoyed, I got up and walked as quickly as I dared through a pitch-black room. In a few steps, I was at the window, and the moment I reached the window enough to see through it, the banging stopped. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, a few seconds later, the banging resumed, this time at the front door. A wave of panic shot through me. I was staying in a carriage house near the sea, belonging to the Scotsman Victor left me with. I was so far from the nearby town, so far from the Scotsman's manor, no one would come help me. I dashed to the front door, and once again, the banging stopped once I reached it, and resumed seconds later on the kitchen window. I could picture whoever was doing this laughing to themselves as I dashed madly into the kitchen. Fear twisted my stomach into knots, made my heart pound so loudly I could hear it, and pressed against my chest, making it nearly impossible to breathe. Every nightmare I'd ever had was coming true, for I knew who this was. I knew what it, was going to do to me, and I knew that there was nothing I could do to stop it. But I could not die without doing one thing first. Grabbing some paper and a pen, I locked myself into the cellar and started writing. My name is Henry Clerval. I am by birth a Genovese. My father was a merchant and he loved his trade, so much so that he could not see why anyone would want to do anything else. My mother passed away from smallpox when I was 7 years old. My father immersed himself in his work, and I immersed myself in stories. I grew up in a big old house built hundreds of years ago by a great-grandfather of mine, the last of us to have any considerable wealth. Perhaps it was nice one day, but I knew it as an old, broken-down home, appearing slightly hunched over from the outside, tied down by wild vines and ropes of ivy, rotting from the inside out. Inside, we were greeted by grand cracked windows, creaky floors, and drafty rooms. These images of my old home remain to this day imprinted in my mind, with nostalgia and happy childhood memories attached. I spent nearly all my time in the old library on the house's top floor. I was enchanted by tales of brave knights and bright men, courageously saving the kingdom, the town, the maiden, the land. I pictured myself as one of them, proud, heroic, great. As I grew older, I began writing my own tales, conceiving my own happy endings. Victor always saw this, writing, reading, languages in general, as my passion. He saw it all very logically. These stories were to me what the sciences were to him. But these stories for me were a way to escape into a better reality, while the sciences for him were an obsession that would lead to his downfall. I met Victor at school. Both constantly reading, we quickly became insufferable. As we grew closer and Victor let me into his world more and more, I could not believe the life he led. He was infinitely wealthy, infinitely loved by his ever-present parents, siblings, and Elizabeth, and infinitely determined in his studies. His studies were our only source of disagreement. He sought to understand the mysteries of nature, to discover the logic between everything, believing that science would only improve civilization more and more. I didn't like this. Nature should be seen as violent, terrifying, unpredictable, and this was what made it beautiful. The scientific worldview of explaining everything through reason and logic had always seemed rather cold, sterile, robbing us of our humanity. Nonetheless, at this young age, I respected Victor for his ambitions, his brilliance, his willingness to learn. My envy for him peaked when his father proudly agreed to let him attend Ingolstadt to further his studies. No matter how much I begged and pleaded with my father, I couldn't convince him to let me join Victor. Saying goodbye to Victor was therefore one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, as I was also saying goodbye to my own aspirations. Little did I know that this was the last time I'd truly see Victor. The time after Victor had left went by slowly. I was caught in a loop of reading and doing work for my father. After a while, my father finally gave in and allowed me to go to Ingolstadt, rather due to my persistent begging than a change of mind, but in any case, I departed in late fall for university. I could never forget what I saw upon my arrival. As my carriage rolled into campus, I looked around excitedly at what would become my new home. Dawn had just begun, with a faint orange glow lining the horizon, separating the dark sky from the built-up land, all blanketed by a layer of fog. In this sinister light, I saw only one moving figure in the otherwise still sleeping town, a tall, gravely thin man. He stumbled around, taking irregular steps as if he were mad, his eyes fixed on the cobblestone road below him, though he didn't seem to see anything at all. It took me several minutes of staring at this strange madman to realize that this was, in fact, my best friend. Immeasurable happiness immediately flooded my senses upon recognizing Victor. Drowning my concern, I leapt out of the carriage, approaching Victor. Once he saw me, a smile filled his face. We greeted each other warmly, but I could tell that Victor was far from all right. He was barely recognizable. My confusion only grew as he took me back to his apartment, behaving oddly, switching from panic to delirious joy. When he collapsed in a fit of seizures, I realized I'd have to delay my studies further and nurse my friend back to health. I set up a sickbed and sat with him as he slept on that first day. He woke up as the night fell, looking as tired and delirious as ever. "Victor," I had said, "you should rest." He didn't seem to see me or hear me at all. Instead, his eyes were fixed at a spot directly above his head, like he was looking into the face of someone standing over his bed, watching him. His face was a mask of horror. "Victor," I said, then walked over and shook him awake. He blinked, looking at me for the first time. "Henry," he said weakly. "Henry, you need to leave." "You're ill, Victor, go back to sleep." Victor shook his head, tears welled up in his eyes. "You don't understand, Henry, you don't understand what I've done." He once again began to tremble in fear. "What happened?" I asked curiously. He looked at me. "I've created a monster." For months, I thought he was referring to himself. Victor never mentioned the monster again, and I was fairly certain he had forgotten our conversation, but his words stuck in my mind. I began to piece together what had happened after he regained his health and introduced me to his professors. I noticed his newfound aversion to science, how he had abandoned his passion entirely. I immediately assumed that he had grown obsessed with his studies, which had repercussions on his health, relationships, and sanity, and he'd become monstrous. I didn't investigate too deeply, however, as that time at Ingolstadt with Victor was the happiest in my life. It was not long before Victor had to leave, to go home and be with his family, after the death of his brother, a loss I myself grieved deeply. I busied myself in my studies. Then came the third and final strand of my adventures with Victor, upon his invitation to travel with him to England. My time is running out, so I shall spare you the details of our travels from place to place and under the gloomy British clouds and incessant rain. I will, however, offer one last description of Victor. When I saw him again, he looked no healthier than he had recovered from his illness in Ingolstadt. Thin, pale, weak. Since I had last seen him, he seemed sadder and more alone. The curious, excitable young man that had left for Ingolstadt while I stayed back all those years ago was entirely unrecognizable. He lived in perpetual fear and worry, jumping at the slightest of sounds. He resumed his studies, but now, with concerning obsession, seeming to despise everything he was learning. It had become more evident than ever that something had happened. In that time before his illness, when Victor was all alone, a horrible obsession with the sciences that had completely corrupted him as a human being and turned him into a monster. I would have believed that this was all there was to his words, "I've created a monster," if it weren't for the feeling that we were constantly being watched. I must end this here. I have written and read countless stories in my life, but this is more important than any other. I have always dreamt of having the great courage and honor of a knight, of becoming a savior and a hero, and this is my chance. Dear reader, I beg you to take the story as a warning. Nature's secrets are better left unknown, for if you obsess over these secrets, you will only lose yourself. With a panicked flourish, I finished my last sentence just as the cellar door was torn off violently. I was done playing games. I didn't pause to look at whatever it was. I dropped my pen and ran for the opposite door, leading outside. I flew along the coast towards the town, counting on the pitch-black night and howling winds to cover me. When I finally reached the town's docks, my first thought was to ask a stranger to let me into their home, but bringing the creature to anyone seemed too cruel. Instead, I hid between two buildings, sinking down to my knees, catching my breath. It was not long before I caught sight of the monster. Just as dawn blossomed over a dark, cloudy night, I saw the tall, thin, dark figure, walking with wide, irregular steps. His eyes stared out, but it didn't seem to see anything. An image of Victor, walking in the exact same way back at Ingolstadt came to mind. The monster. Suddenly, its gaze shifted to me, and in the darkness, all that stood out were its ugly, horrid eyes. Instinctively, I closed my own eyes. When I opened them again, the monster was no longer there.